All right, let's get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Molly Denon. I'm the manager of the Center for Languages and Interculturality at the University of Santiago of Chile. On behalf of our center, I'd like to thank you all this morning and welcome you to our second webinar in the series called US-Chile Talks. This series is dedicated to exploring the language and culture surrounding the Sustainable Development Goals from a local Chilean perspective and as well from a global North American perspective. The purpose of this series is to invite our community, both globally and locally, to an open conversation which will enrich our perspectives on the SDGs through a focus on language and culture. By focusing on language and culture, our community will be able to relate to the important initiatives relevant to moving towards a more just society and a multilingual and multicultural USACH community. Today's webinar is about SDG number 4, quality education. And here with us to guide our discussion is USACH's Doctora Constanza Herrera, academic from the Department of Education, and representing the global perspective, Dr. Herrera will be joined by Dr. Nicole Hauser from Rutgers University. Dr. Hauser is the director of Rutgers English Language Institute, as well as the co-director of the Language and Social Justice Initiative at Rutgers. They have designed a special presentation for us this morning, in which they will talk us through some of their experiences, perspectives, and approaches to social justice and education, highlighting some of the linguistic and cultural influences. Muy buenos días a todos. Mi nombre es Molly Denon, soy coordinadora del Centro de Lenguas e Interculturalidad de la Universidad de Santiago de Chile. En nombre del centro, me gustaría agradecerles y darles la bienvenida al segundo webinar en la serie llamada US-Chile Talks. Esta serie está dedicada a explorar el lenguaje y las culturas en torno a los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, desde una perspectiva local chilena y desde una perspectiva global norteamericana. El propósito de esta serie es invitar a nuestra comunidad a una conversación abierta que enriqueza nuestra perspectiva sobre los ODS a través de un enfoque en lenguaje y la cultura. Al centrarse en el idioma y la cultura, nuestra comunidad podrá relacionarse con las importantes iniciativas relevantes para avanzar hacia una sociedad más justa. El webinar de hoy se trata sobre el ODS número 4, educación de calidad. Y aquí con nosotros, para guiar nuestra conversación, está la doctora Constanza Herrera, académica del Departamento de Educación de la Facultad de Humanidades de la Universidad de Santiago. Y representando la perspectiva global, la doctora Herrera estará acompañada por la doctora Nicole Hauser de la Universidad de Rutgers. La doctora Hauser es la directora del Instituto de Lengua Inglesa de Rutgers y también la codirectora de la Iniciativa de Lenguaje y Justicia Social. Ellas dos han diseñado una presentación especial para nosotros hoy día, en la que ellas van a guiarnos a través de algunas de sus experiencias, perspectivas y enfoques de la justicia social en la educación, destacando algunas de las influencias lingüísticas y culturales. Si hay algunas preguntas del público, por favor escríbenlas en el chat o reténganlas hasta el final de la presentación. Este webinar se está grabando y también se transmite en directo en YouTube. Y ustedes que están inscritos también después recibirán el enlace para la grabación. Así que muchas gracias a todos, muchas gracias Nicole, Constanza. Y Constanza, te dejamos la palabra.
Bien, hi everyone, hola a todos, muchas gracias por la invitación. Hoy día voy a compartir con ustedes una presentación que se relaciona con un trabajo de investigación que hemos venido desarrollando y espero que sea sumamente interesante para motivar este diálogo. Entonces, denme un momento. ¿Se está viendo lo que estoy compartiendo?
Sí, se ve.
Perfecto. Entonces, ahí. Lo que quiero compartir con ustedes tiene que ver con cómo profesores en formación, particularmente profesores en formación de enseñanza básica o de primaria, pueden construir un enfoque inclusivo, desde que conocimientos, desde qué conceptos es posible situarse desde una perspectiva inclusiva. Particularmente, yo me sitúo desde un enfoque de la inclusión que se relaciona con la justicia social. Desde este enfoque, entonces, entendemos la inclusión como una lucha constante, un proceso permanente para que, siguiendo a Fraser, ¿no?, existan tres condiciones. Por una parte, para que exista redistribución en el acceso y la participación, pero también reconocimiento y valoración de todos los estudiantes considerando su amplia diversidad, y representación de los grupos que son no dominantes o han sido tradicionalmente excluidos en el contexto educativo y social, de modo que sus reivindicaciones también puedan ser abordadas. Entonces, con esta perspectiva de inclusión en mente, vamos a mirar algunos elementos que contextualizan en Chile qué sucede con la formación de profesores para la inclusión. En Chile tenemos una serie de condiciones que dificultan de alguna manera que los profesores puedan estar preparados para enfrentar esta idea de desarrollar una educación para todos, de calidad, equitativa a lo largo de la vida. Algunos elementos están situados, algunas barreras están situados en la misma política pública, es decir, existe un solapamiento de la perspectiva tradicional de integración escolar, donde existe un predominio de la comprensión de que la inclusión tiene que ver solo con las necesidades educativas especiales o la discapacidad, y otra perspectiva más amplia de la inclusión que reconoce la diversidad de todos los estudiantes en términos de género, etnia, condición migratoria, etc. Entonces, en la política pública existen iniciativas de ambos tipos que se encuentran solapadas. Entonces, para los profesores, tanto en formación como en ejercicio, es difícil poder orientar su acción. Por otra parte, tenemos un predominio de políticas educativas neoliberales. Entonces, tenemos sistemas de rendición de cuentas con altas consecuencias para quienes participan en las comunidades educativas, y ha habido una alta privatización también, lo que hace más difícil poder tener una educación pública donde todos tienen un espacio de encuentro. Al mismo tiempo hay una desvinculación entre las universidades y las escuelas. La investigación que les voy a mostrar se da en el contexto de la formación práctica de quienes se están formando como profesores. Entonces estos vínculos son más bien aislados, tienen que ver con la falta de una política que realmente integre el trabajo de la universidad y de la escuela. La investigación, que es muy poca hoy día en Chile acerca de cómo formamos profesores para la inclusión, muestra que en general los profesores, tanto en ejercicio como en formación inicial, sienten que están poco preparados y que consideran que su formación más bien tiene un abordaje teórico, restringido, que no les permite desarrollar una práctica inclusiva propiamente tal. Bien, entonces, ¿cuál fue nuestra investigación? Nosotros, junto con otros profesores de la universidad, Carolina García, Carlos Vanegas y Constanza Cárdenas, desarrollamos este proyecto que buscaba comprender las creencias de los profesores en relación con la inclusión, particularmente durante su proceso de formación práctica, y desarrollamos este trabajo con una metodología cualitativa. Hicimos un análisis documental, pero también entrevista a los actores claves. Lo que yo les voy a mostrar hoy día es una parte acotada de esta investigación más amplia, que me ha parecido especialmente interesante a la luz de lo que estamos conversando. Entonces, con los profesores en formación nosotros desarrollamos una técnica particular que se denomina entrevista episódica. Las entrevistas episódicas recogen, por una parte, las experiencias vinculadas a una educación inclusiva que han vivido los profesores en formación, y por otra parte conceptos que ellos vinculan a la inclusión. Entonces, primero les pedíamos relatar sus experiencias, ponerles un título en una aplicación. Luego hacíamos otro mapa con los conceptos que conocemos en relación a la inclusión, y luego hacíamos un esquema integrado, que es el ejemplo que ustedes están viendo, donde los profesores en formación señalaban cómo los conceptos se relacionaban con sus experiencias. Y eso es sumamente interesante porque el enfoque inclusivo surge a la luz de un conocimiento que está enraizado en la práctica, en la cultura, en cada uno de los contextos donde se forman estos profesores. Entonces, estos mapas nos permitían comprender cómo están mirando la inclusión y su rol en ella, y como van a ver es sumamente interesante. Entonces voy a mostrarles dos casos. Nosotros tuvimos 18 profesores y profesoras en formación, pero vamos a ver dos que son de la misma universidad, tienen el mismo plan de estudio, son compañeras de generación, pero tienen perspectivas distintas en relación a la inclusión, y van a ver en sus mapas que también tienen conocimientos y asocian a la inclusión conceptos que son distintos. Entonces, el primer caso le vamos a llamar el caso de Verónica, no se llama así, pero vamos a usar ese nombre. Y como ven, el mapa de Verónica es un mapa más bien sencillo, donde están por una parte las experiencias. Apoyo a la lectura se refiere a una experiencia donde a los estudiantes los sacaban de la sala para darles apoyo en lectura. Entonces ella hablaba acerca de la segregación que allí se daba. Lo mismo en relación a los talleres de lectura, que tenía que ver con una experiencia fuera del aula, que si bien estaba orientada a apoyar, terminaba marginando a algunos estudiantes, y el apoyo a la conducta, que significaba enviar fuera de la sala a un estudiante que presentaba dificultades para seguir las actividades. Entonces la profesora lo expulsaba de la sala y lo enviaba a inspectoría. Entonces, en relación con estas tres experiencias, Verónica identifica conceptos que podríamos decir son más bien generales en relación a la inclusión. No es que no estén vinculados a la inclusión, equidad, igualdad, derecho, respeto, están sumamente vinculados, pero son más bien conceptos generales que como van a ver ahora, evidencian más bien una comprensión superficial acerca de lo que la inclusión es. Nosotros con el mapa les pedíamos explicar el mapa, entonces así también podíamos comprender cuál era la profundidad de la comprensión que tenían sobre el tema. Y Verónica lo que tenía es lo que tenemos aquí en la mano derecha, es decir, tenía un solapamiento de enfoques. Por una parte, tenía una serie de comprensiones o ideas que se relacionaban con una educación inclusiva, de la idea de derecho, de apoyar dentro del aula, de aprender integralmente, de respeto, de enseñar para ser feliz. Pero al mismo tiempo, en su discurso, aparecían esta otra perspectiva que significa que busca que los estudiantes sean igualados a una suerte de norma que está establecida en la escuela. Entonces los estudiantes presentan un déficit respecto del cual hay que igualarlo, y su discurso también se centra en las dificultades que tienen esos estudiantes. Entonces dice, los estudiantes son diversos, pero hay unos más diversos que necesitan más apoyo. Entonces ahí uno ve que existe como un solapamiento de ambas perspectivas. Es interesante porque cuando miramos el resto de la entrevista de Verónica, ella cuenta que ella le falta formación teórica, porque su curso fue interrumpido por una serie de condiciones sociales que dejaron el curso a medias. Entonces ella dice, yo no tuve la oportunidad realmente de entender qué era un enfoque inclusivo. Y por otra parte dice, a mí me surgió la necesidad de indagar y aprender más de esto, pero no he tenido suficiente tiempo. Por otra parte, es súper interesante que si miramos su entorno, ella señala que las profesoras guía de la escuela tienden a mostrar más bien prácticas que excluyen. Entonces, no necesariamente son buenos ejemplos para poder desarrollar este enfoque inclusivo. Y sus profesoras supervisoras, tanto de la universidad como de la escuela, no saben cómo desarrollar un enfoque inclusivo realmente. Saben, digamos así, los titulares, hay aquella comprensión general, pero no saben cómo eso se lleva a la práctica. Y eso es sumamente interesante si recordamos el mapa de Verónica, que también era muy general, ¿no? Esa es Verónica. Esta es Paulina. Si se fijan, el mapa de Paulina está mucho más relacionado, los elementos, tiene mucho más elementos, sobre todo en términos conceptuales, y los elementos que tienen se relacionan con aspectos mucho más específicos acerca de cómo la inclusión lleva a la práctica. No solo estos conocimientos más de sentido común, sino aspectos precisos. Y ella ancla sus conceptos a 3 experiencias, la que se llama anonadada, que es muy similar a las experiencias de Verónica, que refiere a cómo se da este apoyo a los estudiantes fuera del aula y se termina excluyendo a los estudiantes. Habla de desafío, que es una experiencia más bien de inclusión, donde ella dice, yo pude romper mis prejuicios, compartir con familia, entonces es una experiencia positiva en términos de cómo desarrollar un enfoque inclusivo, y la que denomina contradicción, y que se relaciona con una escuela que es sumamente rígida y que le dificulta a los estudiantes poder aprender considerando su amplia diversidad. Y a estos conceptos, o sea, a estas experiencias ancla conceptos vinculados a la empatía, a la comprensión, más bien de la dimensión emocional, pero también aspectos que tienen que ver con el quehacer docente, como adaptabilidad, flexibilidad, acceso, que son temas particulares respecto de los cuales tenemos que trabajar cuando pensamos en un aula inclusiva. Y también tiene una idea bien comunitaria acerca de la inclusión, pensando que está allí y menciona, ¿no? Aquí en el esquema, familia, profesorado, equipo, casa, escuela, hace esa visión más integral acerca de cómo se debe dar esta transformación para la justicia educativa. Entonces aquí está el mapa de las creencias de Paulina. Las creencias de Paulina son más bien desde un enfoque inclusivo. Y por una parte tiene algunos principios básicos en su comprensión que tienen que ver con la idea de todos sin excepción. Ella no se focaliza en estudiantes que tengan más dificultades, sino que ella dice hay que generar condiciones para todos y todas las estudiantes. Hay que dar oportunidades, hay que flexibilizar lo que hacemos, buscar otros modos, y este es un desafío compartido por las familias, las escuelas, y allí los docentes tenemos un rol sumamente importante. Entonces detalla mucho más, como decía antes, cuál es el rol que tienen los docentes en la inclusión. Entonces, si miramos la entrevista ampliada de Paulina, vemos que la adquisición de los conceptos vinculados a la inclusión es mucho más profunda, y esos conceptos, ella dice, fueron corroborados en la práctica, es decir, aquellas cuestiones que había aprendido en la formación inicial, pudo desarrollarlo también o profundizarlo en las experiencias que tuvo, experiencias que son tanto de inclusión como de exclusión, ¿no? La práctica le permite romper prejuicios, ver prácticas inclusivas, no solo prácticas de exclusión, y sí es interesante que señala que sus formadoras, tanto de la universidad como de la escuela, limitan su posibilidad de explorar un enfoque inclusivo. Es decir, que si bien tienen una idea acerca de lo que la inclusión es, cuando ella propone hacer modificaciones a la práctica, a las planificaciones o a las clases, las profesoras le dicen, no, es mejor mantenerse en lo que hemos hecho habitualmente, aun cuando ella se da cuenta que eso no llega a todos los estudiantes. Entonces, a diferencia de Verónica, que tiene una percepción más bien de que no tiene suficiente formación, Paulina tiene una idea de que sabe qué es la inclusión, pero se siente un poco insegura acerca de cómo llevarlo a la práctica por esta falta de oportunidades para ella misma hacerlo y ver qué es lo que sucede. Entonces, para concluir, más que señalar conclusiones, me gustaría abrir algunas interrogantes, ¿no? Por ejemplo, ¿qué aspectos de la formación de la universidad diferencian la relación que tenemos con el conocimiento adquirido? qué aspectos particulares de los cursos que desarrollamos, porque aquí tenemos dos estudiantes que tuvieron exactamente el mismo proceso de formación, en ambas se vio interrumpida su formación en el curso de inclusión, pero hay una que logra desarrollarlo y hay otra que no. Por otra parte, ¿cómo se materializa una reflexión que permita otorgar sentido, ¿cierto?, a las experiencias de exclusión de la práctica? No solo que lo veamos, sino que tengamos la oportunidad en la universidad de hacer sentido a esas experiencias. Y cómo se desarrolla, y este me parece que es un elemento fundamental si pensamos la inclusión en su sentido amplio o las distintas instituciones vinculadas a este desafío de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, cómo desarrollamos entre la universidad y la escuela una comunicación que nos permita construir un lenguaje común en torno a la inclusión, donde comprendamos la inclusión desde una perspectiva similar, que puede tener, por supuesto, matices, pero donde hablamos un lenguaje común. Cuando decimos inclusión, estamos hablando más o menos de lo mismo, y donde, por otra parte, podemos orientar nuestra práctica con base en aquellos conocimientos que hemos construido en cada contexto en particular. Eso es lo que quería compartir hoy día con ustedes. Muchas gracias por escucharme.
Muchísimas gracias, Constanza. Estuvo maravillosa la presentación. Les recuerdo, si hay alguna pregunta para Constanza específicamente, siéntense libres de dejarla en el chat o podemos tomar un tiempo después de la segunda presentación para hacer preguntas. Así que muchas gracias, Constanza. Ahora vamos a la perspectiva global norteamericana. Nicole. Excellent. So I leave you all with Dr. Nicole Hauser from Rutgers University, who will talk about the same subject, but from a much different perspective. So Nicole, it's all you. Thank you.
Thank you, Molly, and thank you, Dr. Herrera, for sharing your important work and your research. There are many, as you all will observe, there are many similarities in our themes, and I'm honored. It's an honor and a privilege to be part of this first installment of this discussion, especially on the theme of language and social justice in education. In addition to my role as director of Rutgers English Language Institute, as Molly had mentioned, I am a co-director of a new initiative at Rutgers University, New Brunswick, New Jersey, the Language and Social Justice Initiative. And what I would like to share with you today to open this theme, to discuss and share what we are currently initiating at our university within this context, in this theme, is one of the projects within the Language and Social Justice Initiative, which is the Linguistic Landscape Project. And as it is so important, not only within the field of languages, to understand the connection between language and social justice, but we discussed within this initiative, this is a transdisciplinary initiative, because linguists and language specialists are not the only ones in educational systems evaluating student languages, right? Student language is evaluated by faculty across disciplines. So one of the goals and objectives of the initiative broadly is to address language and social justice across the disciplines and create these conversations. And this particular project within the initiative, Linguistic Landscape Project, and associated courses that I will present today, the objective is to create transdisciplinary conversations and scholarship on language and social justice. Okay, so before we begin, I'd like to share another screen here. I think if you can all see this. And what I'm presenting right now so I will be presenting about a course that I created, a first-year experience on the linguistic landscape of the area of New Brunswick, New Jersey. And in addition to investigating the history of different communities within our area, this also was an opportunity for students to share their linguistic backgrounds. And I wanted to talk about the local context of our student population within the regional context as well as national context within this initiative. So as you see here, so I asked students, these are the results of a poll from Poll Everywhere that I conducted within the course. I asked students to describe their linguistic backgrounds. And so as you can see from the student responses here, not only do students speak multiple languages in addition to English, but they often signal and talk about heritage languages that they're speaking. And so they contrast this with the languages they have learned in an academic context. And so you can see here, my heritage language is Mandarin, I can read and write. And within this course, within this student population, 18 students, 16 out of 18 students reported heritage languages that they spoke in addition to English. Okay. Let me return back to my presentation. Okay. Can everyone see the presentation? Is the presentation visible?
Yes, looks good.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I wanted to give that context and show the students, self-reporting, because the context of Rutgers, New Brunswick is very reflective. The demographics are reflective of the state of New Jersey, which is one of the most culturally, ethnically, and linguistically diverse states in the United States. And then also the research that was conducted within our university was the catalyst for the Language Engagement Project, the formation of RELI as an institute, and also the Language and Social Justice Initiative. And so I have here I'm presenting the context here, some survey data, research conducted by the Language Engagement Project Advisory Council on student linguistic diversity. And actually, you see in the chart here, the linguistic diversity of students, faculty, and staff at Rutgers, New Brunswick. So I wanted to present some key findings here to contextualize why this initiative was formed, and then also to give a context for the project of the Linguistic Landscape Project within the initiative. So the major findings here, you see that across populations, the majority, over 80%, and this is reflected in what we see the students reporting that I showed you. And then I also have here a word cloud of other students survey. I survey students on the linguistic landscape of my classroom with every class I teach to understand the linguistic and cultural expertise and resources students bring to the classroom context. And you see in this word cloud here of 31 undergraduate peer instructors who are enrolled in an internship class with me this semester, 27 languages are reported, and many students reported speaking 3, 4, or more languages within this set. So the majority of the population at Rutgers is multilingual. And something else to note here is that 64% of the 84% of students that report to be multilingual have these languages, report these languages as heritage languages. So they're languages spoken at home and school. This depends, this is on a continuum. Now, 2 other key findings that I want to share here to contextualize the importance of doing this work in language and social justice across disciplines is that students also reported in this survey, the Research Council found that there was a major contrast, a major discrepancy between how comfortable participants were speaking languages other than English at home and on campus. So students overwhelmingly reported discomfort with speaking languages other than English on campus, in the most diverse, linguistically diverse state at the largest public institution in that state, This was quite alarming to all of us, but again, not surprising given the historical language ideologies that have guided educational practices within the United States. Also, in addition to this, students reported most participants felt that speaking a language other than English was not valued academically. So I wanted to share these key findings. These findings were not only a major catalyst for creating the initiatives, right, that I'm going to discuss, the Language and Social Justice Initiative, the Language Engagement Project, but they are also to contextualize and guide, right? They are reflective of the ideologies and the practices rooted in social inequality that we must interrogate and confront and transform in order to truly create inclusive teaching environments. Okay, so moving to language and social, to applying language and social justice within the educational context, I'm citing here Ingrid Pillar and her work on linguistic diversity and social justice. Pillar describes the monolingual habitus of multilingual schools, and the attitudes and the understandings and the devaluing of languages other than English that the students reported in our survey at Rutgers, New Brunswick, is indicative of this history. And in the United States in particular, so this is the local context, but the national context, right? You have the global context as well, but nationally within the United States, you find, and Pillar's context here is Australia, but it's true of and indicative of many European colonial contexts, right? The nationalistic agenda of schooling includes the suppression of linguistic diversity and the inculcation of the standard variety of the dominant language as the only legitimate form of linguistic expression. And so we're working and operating continually within this context. As I mentioned, within the United States, this tension between monolingual ideologies and pluralistic ideologies with linguistic diversity within the country, reflective of social inequalities within the history and the context of the country, are always, right, are part of our educational system, especially in bilingual education. So in applying and understanding any type of linguistic language and social justice initiative within education, the major goal is to interrogate and transform language ideologies that perpetuate social inequalities that I had just mentioned. And in defining social justice, and this was mentioned in our previous presentation, right, understanding access, right, really taking that critical and sustained examination of the ways in which our practices, the ways in which we define language education, the language that we use to reflect this framing perpetuates these social inequalities, reflects these ideologies that are rooted in inequalities and the practices that we use. The critical part of this is critical, right? And it's a very difficult, as we observed in the two case studies, right? It's more than just tips and tricks discussing the idea of diversity and inclusion. This takes sustained and critical engagement, really deep reflection. These ideologies and these practices are rooted in our systems over centuries, right? So this takes sustained engagement. And I wanted to call attention to this in particular to frame the project, the Linguistic Landscape Project, as it is a transdisciplinary and sustained research project and initiative with this in mind. Much of the social justice and education work talks about dispositions and changing dispositions rather than, right, enacting some sort of skill or ability or pedagogical task. It's a formation that takes a long time, right, to interrogate and undo the thinking and the practices created by these ideologies. So the goal is toward group individual social change. And as Avenary, Graham, Johnson, Conley, Reiner, and Rosa mention in their work from 2019, right, this is both a process and a goal. So it's a constant, right, reflective process that we're engaged in, that we all need to engage in. There's no place of arrival where we're all inclusive and everything is equal and just. It's this constant dialogue, and it's also very dependent, context dependent. Okay, so moving to the project then, given these contexts, Linguistic Landscape Project at Rutgers, and I have here, this is a mock-up of the website. This is the initiative overall began in the spring of 2021. So this is a very new initiative. All of these projects are underway. The course that I'm going to share today, I just taught for the first time this semester, I just concluded it. But the Linguistic Landscape Project is a website that will, both document and investigate the linguistic diversity of Rutgers University and the surrounding area. It will be an interactive website that showcases the research of both students and faculty across disciplines related to linguistic diversity across different schools. The projects will, from a focused first-year seminar, will be featured on the site, which we plan for the site to go live, the first installment of the site in this spring, 2022. And we plan to create other courses across disciplines, as I mentioned, to further engage in this research, right? So this is a transdisciplinary initiative that's beginning with one specialized course, and will branch out to different populations of students and faculty to have this ever-growing resource and map documenting the linguistic diversity of our community. Okay, so I wanted to discuss the rationale for and the project of using linguistic landscape research to engage in projects and initiatives for language and social justice across disciplines. So linguistic landscape research, and this is actually a photo of the slide that I shared with students on the first day of a specialized first-year seminar on mapping the linguistic landscape of New Brunswick. And so linguistic landscape research is a subfield of sociolinguistics, for those of you who are not familiar with this work. And the research documents, the purpose is it documents the language and the signs of public spaces. It's very community-based, right? And the data that is collected, it reflects languages, varieties, dialects, registers within the community, images and sounds. The data that is collected are photos of signage, images, digital resources, interviews, recordings of people in the community and in the population itself. The analysis, and this is also a key component because it is a formal critical perspective and approach. So in addition to documenting and mapping the linguistic diversity within the community, the analysis then that is applied is a critical discourse analysis, cultural perspective that then contextualizes this signage across images and languages within the socio-political historical context. So students then discuss and conduct library research as well on the demographics of the area, the history, the social relationships, the power relationships. So you have this critical analysis component, which is key to a mission of language and social justice initiatives. And so the overarching goal is to create awareness of and promote linguistic diversity within that community and more broadly. And I have here, and this, as I mentioned, this is a slide that I shared with the students to introduce the course on the first day. And as I mentioned, this is a first year experience course for the students, and they go and conduct their own field research within the community. But as an introduction, I shared this map, Languages of New York City. If you're not familiar with it here, I really would like to suggest that you check it out. It's a really comprehensive interactive site. It is from the Endangered Language Alliance, and it's an interactive map that shows the heritage and also endangered languages within the region of New York City. New Brunswick is also included, and it shows videos, reports, and it gives the history of the different languages spoken, the history of the immigration of different communities in that region. And so I show this, we share this together, and students explore this map as an understanding of, what this work is, introducing them to this work in critical engagement, critical language awareness, representation of, and also promotion of linguistic diversity within the context of linguistic landscape research. So their first assignment is to choose one of their heritage languages to research and another language they have never heard of before, and present to the class information about those languages and what they learn before they begin their own linguistic landscape research. Right, and so the course of which I'm speaking, the first course related to the overall linguistic landscape project is called The Languages That Surround Us, Mapping the Linguistic Landscape of New Brunswick. And again, this course is for first semester students. So this was the first time I taught the course. All students were new students to Rutgers, New Brunswick, and undergraduate students. They had a variety, as you saw, of linguistic backgrounds. They also came from a variety of majors. Students were marketing majors, psychology majors, speech pathology, entomology, different cognitive psychology, social sciences. There was a wide range of majors and interests of the students. So the course goals the course takes in a linguistic landscape approach. Students conduct field research and collect photo data of signage. They also conduct library research in which they research the history of place names and how that relates to the cultural, linguistic, and ethnic history, and also current demographics of New Brunswick. They also conduct a critical analysis of what this means, right? Of the namings, of the practices of naming places, of also what the signage means in different spaces, what it means to be reflected in a mural versus a handwritten sign on a business. Historically over time, contextualizing the sights and sounds around them across languages within this socio-political and historical context. So the goals here, as I have listed, are to gain a deeper understanding of the diverse communities, past and present, of New Brunswick, their new community, discover what signs, symbols, and sounds that surround them reveal about the cultural and linguistic histories of the community and how we relate to one another. Again, critically contextualizing this signage within the socio-political historical context. And they're also learning to apply research methods in the field of sociolinguistics. And then we also discuss, and students in our final reflection, discuss how this research can be applied across majors and professions. And all students at the end of the course discussed in detail how this work relates specifically to their field of study, and expressed not only this greater understanding of the languages around them and the signage and what this reflects about our context and about power relationships between social groups and the history of this new context and culture to which they are arriving in New Brunswick. But then they also reflected on professionally what that would mean across their fields. And then also they contextualized themselves within this context. And then finally, I want to point out, so these are some examples. These are some images of the area of New Brunswick. And just to give some more context of the local history and context here, you will see that there's a mural. So you have different languages, and you even have murals. There are many murals in New Brunswick that reflect the cultural linguistic history of the region. The one mural at the bottom here that has no language, but just images, reflects the cross-cultural dialogue between Latinx, Hungarian, and Polish communities in New Brunswick. At one point in the early 1900s, New Brunswick was the most Hungarian city in the United States. And now currently, the Spanish-speaking population, in particular, foreign-born population from Mexico, is the highest in the state. 7% is the percentage statewide. In New Brunswick, it's 47.5%. And so we talked about that. Even within Spanish-speaking populations, we talked about within the Mexican population, the indigenous language is represented and what that means for bilingual education in schools. So we started looking at this history, right? Students were learning about the linguistic and cultural and ethnic history surrounding them and what that means for policy, for school context, social context, and their professional goals as well, and personal goals, and how they related personally as well. One student who was from Paterson, New Jersey, contrasted, right, his experience, his background is Peruvian, and he talked about the Peruvian population and compared and contrasted this population with the Mexican population within New Brunswick. And so we had these conversations about, these experiences. Other students, in spite of the fact of, New Jersey being such a diverse state, I think that in the US, there's sometimes this idea of, well, it's diverse, so everyone understands diversity. Several students reported that they did not ever talk about any of these topics. This is their first introduction to even discussing these influences across cultures. That students were reflective on a variety of levels and contexts here. And so we analyzed this type of the signage that you see here and talked about it in context, within the historical context, within the present day demographics, and critically examining what that means. Okay, and as well, I am ending with a series of questions as well to open this dialogue. And then, as we continue to discuss, whoever's questions that anyone in the audience would like to address. But I wanted to inquire first if anyone here currently engages in linguistic landscape research in your own context. Is it aligned with social justice initiatives? To what extent is it transdisciplinary? In what ways could this project be adapted for your own context as a social justice initiative? What other projects and initiatives address language and social justice across disciplines? And what are the challenges locally, nationally, and globally for enacting in these projects? As I had mentioned, to me, saying language and social justice in education or in any context is somewhat redundant given the fact that any key to creating inclusive environments, in particular in an educational context, must consider language, how we judge others' languages, how we frame language education. As I mentioned, we are all evaluating student languages regardless of our disciplinary backgrounds. So I invite you all to share your experiences and thoughts around these questions and any others. Thank you so much for listening. And here's my contact information if you have any questions, concerns, anything you would like to know about these projects.
Thank you so much, Nicole and Constanza. Both of you decided to end your presentations with questions after giving us really interesting examples from very different perspectives. So considering both of you finished with questions, I'd like to ask our audience members if anyone would like to comment on those questions, respond to those questions, and also take the last 10 minutes or so to see if the audience has any questions for either one of you. So to those members in the audience, feel free to raise a hand, open your microphone, or write in the chat. So also, Nicole and Constanza, when we sent out the sign up form, we also provided a space for questions. So there are some questions there. So one question that's really interesting, as students, how can we support quality education for everyone? So from the perspective of students, I think both of you could answer this question. I don't know if Constanza, Nicole, if someone wants to go first. Yeah, Constanza, por favor.
Es una interesante pregunta. Yo creo que justamente es posible, a la luz del ejercicio que Nicole planteaba en su curso, relevar un elemento que yo creo que como estudiante es importante, que tiene que ver con revisitar las propias perspectivas que tenemos acerca de la interculturalidad, acerca de la inclusión, acerca de distintos grupos que se encuentran en nuestra sociedad, porque todos, así como, ¿cierto?, cargamos una serie de saberes que son sumamente valiosos, también cargamos prejuicios, modos en que nos hemos relacionado tradicionalmente. Entonces, mirar nuestras propias creencias y cómo esas se expresan en el día a día, en lo cotidiano, en cómo nos relacionamos con otros, a mí me parece que es un elemento fundamental para pensar como un primer paso para transformar, ¿no? Entonces, mirar alrededor. Me gustaba que yo hablaba de este vínculo entre la escuela y la universidad, y Nicole nos planteaba quizás ir más allá, ¿no? Mirar las comunidades, mirar el espacio en el que nos encontramos, para también interrogarnos de aquello que parece ser natural en algún momento, por ejemplo, segregación espacial en los territorios, pero que no es natural, sino que ha sido construido durante el tiempo. Entonces, salir afuera, mirar, cuestionarnos acerca de nuestras propias ideas, yo creo que es importante.
Muchas gracias, Constanza. Nicole, would you like to answer the same question?
Sure, thank you. Yes, just for students, my suggestion for students, and I'm reflecting on my own experiences as a student, you know, and how my profession, how I've developed professionally, is to begin with exploring and interrogating some of those contradictions within that you're experiencing within your educational context and society, not being afraid to dive deeper to, you know, when you see some things, you're being told this is this way, right? And you feel these contradictions and you see these spaces in which, you know, what is being said and what is being done is not adding up. Really having that critical, taking a critical exploration and initiative into, you know, some of the ways in which, you know, ideas are presented in your educational context, right? And so, you know, this is on us to create these spaces, right? In every, you know, in every space, in every educational space, in every class, right? It is important for us as educators to create this space of critical dialogue, right? And reflection in, you know, we're coming from various, right, levels of expertise. Recently, we had a guest speaker in our Language and Social Justice Initiative, Dr. Netta Avenari, who was one of the editors of the Language and Social Justice text that I cited, said, talking with educators balancing expertise and humility in creating the space of inclusivity in this critical engagement together. But not all the times as students do you experience faculty who create those spaces, but you can create your own, and you can use that as a catalyst to find faculty who do, to find researchers and scholarship that do take these critical approaches. So, you know, not being hesitant to explore, to critically explore, and really, you know, go along with those hunches, those, this isn't adding up, you know, I need to explore, look for other viewpoints here.
Excellent, thank you. I think we have time for just one more question. That's in the chat from Veronica Yanes. She writes, do you think diversity discourses contribute to articulating discrimination? Would either one of you like to address this question? Go ahead, Nicole.
I can start, and especially since diversity discourses have a history now within the U.S. context, and where some say we're post-diversity, and really coming back to a beginning answer to this: any uncritical and decontextualized discourse contributes to articulating, to reiterating, right, and replicating social inequalities, right? As I mentioned, when we're looking at, in the US, there are translingual approaches, different types of diverse inclusivity, right, initiatives. These have been central to missions of higher education and education broadly within the United States for decades now, right? However, making good on these discourses in practice takes real critical work, a lot of discussion, a lot of honest reflection and acknowledgement of the history of social inequality that the educational system is seeped in, was founded upon, was exclusionary to many populations, and to really critically examining the ways in which we need to interrogate and transform those ideologies. So, as I mentioned, any uncritical and decontextualized engagement with those discourses is likely to perpetuate those social inequalities.
Excellent, thank you, Nicole. Constanza, no sé si tienes algún comentario con respecto a...
Me sumo a las palabras de Nicole. Me parece que eso es justamente lo que necesitamos hacer, ¿no? Como interrogarnos críticamente acerca de cómo también utilizamos el discurso en relación a la diversidad. Solo agregaría respecto de la pregunta que siempre que hacemos depende cuál sea, voy a decirlo así, el nivel de profundidad también respecto al conocimiento y la reflexión que hacemos en torno a la diversidad. Es decir, muchas veces utilizamos una serie de conceptos, palabras, que en algún momento emergen como una suerte de posibilidad para generar un espacio más amplio para todos, pero que terminan etiquetando a determinados grupos de la población o a determinados grupos de estudiantes o algunos estudiantes en particular. Entonces, me parece a mí que si bien necesitamos seguir hablando, interrogándonos acerca de la diversidad que existe en nuestras escuelas, en nuestras universidades, en nuestra sociedad, tenemos que ser capaces de construir perspectivas que van más allá de una suerte de sentido común acerca de que más bien se fundamentan en creencias preestablecidas para poder, como un poco mostramos en la investigación, desde un conocimiento más enraizado en lo que hemos vivido, construir perspectivas y discursos en torno a la diversidad que efectivamente puedan abordar su complejidad y abordarla desde una perspectiva crítica.
Muchas gracias, Constanza. Tenemos un comentario, Nicole, from Professor Jorge Marconi. He asks about the students who expressed shyness around speaking other languages on campus. If those messages that they're receiving that other languages don't have academic value, are those messages being received from faculty or administration?
Great, thank you for your question. And so within the survey itself, within the questionnaire, students did not expand on, and give reasons within the survey that was conducted. That's the initial survey data. We're going to then continue surveying students to find out more. But as there are examples, right? Messages are given sort of on all levels, right? On national levels, on regional levels, within our curriculum, down to micro levels and interactions. So we don't know what students expressed, how we did not give them space to, in the survey did not provide space for students to personally share in that response. But for example, on a curricular level, languages are not, a requirement for that's one message that is sent at Rutgers in particular. Also for students who are learners of English as an additional language, taking extra courses, right, that impede time to graduation, which is something that we just addressed and changed within our the writing program structure. There are these are just sort of two examples I can think of on a curricular level that I know of that send those messages. So as in any case, it would be really interesting to do follow-up surveys, and we plan to do this to follow this initial survey data and hear from students in particular. In my experience, and I've only been at Rutgers for 3 years now, from anecdotally, students talk about, when I ask about their linguistic and cultural experience and expertise, having conversations openly, stating this is expertise you're arriving upon which you will build in this class. Students have reported it's the first time they ever discussed this, and they were even ever asked about their linguistic background, from my limited experience at Rutgers, but just anecdotally, to just give some, to add some context and detail to, to the student data. Those are just my personal observations. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nicole. So we're a little bit over our time limit. So Nicole, Constanza, if you have any final words you'd like to leave us with. And if not, that's perfectly fine too. ¿Hay algún comentario?
No, yo solo agradecer esta instancia, especialmente a Nicole por compartir su interesantísimo trabajo, y creo que esto es algo, como bien mostraban las dos presentaciones, sobre lo que necesitamos seguir interrogándonos, ¿no? Entonces valoro mucho que haya existido este espacio, así que muchas gracias, Molly, por la invitación.
Muchas gracias a ti, Constanza, y también a Nicole. Muchas gracias a todo el público por las preguntas, por la participación. Así que estuvo muy genial aprender de los distintos casos, de las perspectivas, porque obviamente hablando del mismo tema, yo creo que se expande mucho la perspectiva. Así que muchas gracias a las dos, a todos que estén aquí. Thank you so much, everyone, for your attendance, your participation. Thank you, Nicole, Constanza. I see many team members of Nicole from Rutgers. Thank you for your support. To everyone from USACH, of course, thank you. In a little while, you receive the link to the YouTube recording. Please feel free to share it with colleagues, with friends, and thank you everyone again for